I'll call this meeting to order. It's the regular meeting of the Transportation Public Works Committee. Today, February 11th, 2014. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'll be chairing the committee. I am joined by Councilmembers Yang, Glidden, Palmisano, Bender, and Gordon. We are a quorum and can do the committee's business. We have 10 items in total today before us on the agenda, 8 of which are on consent. I'll go through them. It's my understanding that Councilmember Gordon will pull one item with some discussion and perhaps a staff direction. Item number 1 is regards Burroughs North Area and DuPont South Street resurfacing project. It approved the resolution designating the location and improvements proposed to be made, received the cost estimate of $1,400,222. List the benefited properties, direct the city engineer to prepare proposed special assessments against those properties, and set the public hearing to be held April 1st, 2014. Item 2 is regarding the Johnson Street Northeast, 10th and 11th Avenue Southeast Street resurfacing projects. Approve a resolution designating the location of the improvements. Receive cost estimates of $202,864. List the benefited properties and direct the city engineer to prepare proposed special assessments against those properties. And that public hearing will be set April 1st, 2014 as well. Item 3 regards the Franklin Avenue Bridge rehabilitation. Approve the project layout for rehabilitation of the historic Kaplan Memorial Bridge, which is Franklin Avenue over the Mississippi River, and full bridge closure for up to 4 months. Item 4, we have the Toltz King Duval Anderson TKDA contract amendment. Extend the expiration date of that consultant pool scope 9 to April 30th, 2014 for design and construction management services for electric car charging stations at multiple parking ramps. Extend the expiration date of the consultant pool scope 10 to December 31st, 2014 for design and construction management services for the replacement of air handler units at the 11th and Marquette ramp skyways. Extend the expiration date of the consultant pool scope 11 to December 31st, 2014 for design and construction management services for the ABC ramp building automation controller replacement project. This item will be referred to the Ways and Means Budget Committee. And item 5 is the Downtown Minneapolis TMO grant amendments. Authorize execution of the Metropolitan Council pass-through grant agreement to provide $407,873 in federal grant funding for the Transportation Demand Management TDM projects for the period January 1st, 2014 through to December 31st, 2014. Authorize execution of an extension of the city agreement with Downtown Minneapolis Transportation Management Organization, aka TMO, to perform specified work outlined in the Met Council contract, providing for the federal grant funding. And the final item regarding item 5 is the approve increasing the appropriation and revenue traffic capital grant fund by $407,873. This also be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Item 6 is the parking control security automation project, federal courthouse ramp. Approve increase to the contract with Harstad Company Incorporated to $24,431.73 to allow for the change order items associated with the parking control and security automation project at that ramp. Item 7 is the government center ramp expansion joint project. Approve increase to the contract with AM Construction to $2,452.81 to allow the change order items associated with the government center ramp expansion joint project. This will be referred to Ways and Means Committee. Item 8 are bids. Accept the low bid of Burwald Roofing Company Incorporated for an estimated expenditure of $53,793 for the government center parking ramp roof replacement project, and accept the low bid of Global Specialty Contractors Incorporated for an estimated expenditure of $393,630.16 for the Fridley Softening Plant basement rehabilitation project. This will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Those are the consent items. Does anyone want to discuss or pull? Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I wanted to pull item number 3, the Franklin Avenue Bridge rehabilitation, for comment and staff direction.
Oh, please go ahead.
Well, first of all, I do want to comment that this is going to be a great improvement to the city. I'm very excited about the historic restorations that are going to go on there just to make the bridge more aesthetically beautiful, and also the protected bikeways that are going to be there. And I think the layout is fine as it is. There are still some lingering concerns about the intersection on the east side of the bridge. It's people who don't know it well, I'll just remind you that's a kind of a five-legged intersection where we have the East River Parkway, Franklin Avenue, and 27th, all converging there. It's a major crossing for a lot of people across the bridge, and because it's so close to the University of Minnesota and the recreational areas, it's also a major area for bicycles. Bicyclists also can head up 27th to get to University to head into St. Paul, or go to the transit way there for bikes to get to the St. Paul campus. And there's some concern still about what the bikes are going to do with the new protected bikeway. So I have a staff direction where I'd like to direct our public works staff to work with Hennepin County and the Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory Committee to develop a safe and convenient connection for eastbound bicyclists on Franklin Avenue to the bike lanes on northbound 27th Avenue Southeast. I've had a chance to confer with staff about this, and people are supportive. So far, we're looking at some signal changes, perhaps something special for bikes to cross, or else some road treatments, so it won't affect the layout or the design, but it could lead to some significant improvements for the bicyclists especially.
Very good. I will, that's, as you pointed out, consistent with the overall direction. So I will move all consent items noting that staff direction. Is there any further discussion? See none. All those in approval say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. Those items carry, and we can now proceed to the other area of our agenda, the discussion items, starting with discussion item 9, Washington Avenue Reconstruction Project. Director Kaki.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lowry. She is the project engineer for Hennepin County, and she will present the item that we have in front of us.
Situated here. Good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. Again, Jennifer Lowry from Hennepin County Transportation. And I'm the senior project manager for this project before you today. We have worked with great staff at Minneapolis and also a great consulting team. I have with me John Horn from Kimley Horn, who will help me with the presentation. We have a short presentation for you on the proposed design of Washington. So, the project had nearly 2 years of public engagement thus far that brought forth guiding design principles, both of which John will further discuss in the next slide. The next slides. The reconstruction segment is from Hennepin to 5th Avenue South. The concept continues east to 35W, but currently has no identified projects or funding at this time. I'll turn it over to John to introduce the engagement.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. As Jennifer said, my name is John Horn. I'm with Kimley Horn & Associates, and we've been assisting Hennepin County and City of Minneapolis staff in the design process for Washington Avenue. I want to spend a little bit of time this morning telling you the background and some of the history of the Washington Avenue corridor, and then Jennifer can get into the details in terms of the layout that's before you today. To start with, I've got a large map in front of you on your screen, and we really felt it was critical as we began looking at the Washington Avenue corridor to consider a broader perspective. Washington Avenue is a very important east-west corridor in Minneapolis, but as we looked at the corridor, we really said we need to think north to the river, south into downtown. We needed to think west of Hennepin Avenue and then all the way over to the west bank of the University of Minnesota. So while Washington Avenue is a corridor, we really thought it was very important to consider the broader perspective, look at some of the other things that are happening in the area, and look at pedestrian and bicycle connections and the importance of Washington Avenue in terms of providing those connections. We did go through a very extensive public engagement process, recognizing that there's a number of people who are very interested in this corridor, and we really needed to get input from those people as we went through this process. And the process was really about balance for Washington Avenue. Today, Washington Avenue is very much a vehicle-oriented corridor, and the question was, how can we better balance the needs of Washington Avenue, providing for pedestrians, bikes, as well as vehicles, and improve the aesthetics and amenities along the Washington Avenue corridor. So the first step of this process was to go through a round of engagement that happened in November and December of 2012. And we had a charrette. The charrette was attended by representatives of downtown business organizations, neighborhood organizations, and the bicycle and pedestrian community. And we really asked the charrette attendees to help us work through that issue of balance. Where do pedestrians fit in the corridor? How do we deal with vehicles? How do we deal with bicycles? What can be done to improve the amenities along Washington Avenue? So we had the shred attendees go through that exercise. We then went to a public meeting and asked the general public to also provide input on that, and also had an online survey that was in place to gather additional input. So through that first round of the public engagement process, we really developed 4 alternatives for Washington Avenue. A first alternative that really tried to add capacity in the pedestrian zone but did not provide for bicycles. A second scenario that added on-road bicycle lanes, bicycle facilities on the road. And then 2 alternatives that actually looked at cycle tracks or providing for bicycle needs outside of the roadway itself, actually within the pedestrian zone. So we went back with the second round of public engagement activities that happened back in May of 2013, did another charrette, same attendees. We really asked people to help us work through looking at each of those alternatives, provide some recommendations and thoughts. Went again to a public meeting, had a great turnout of about 130 attendees, and then had an online survey again and got additional responses through that. In addition, Hennepin County and the City of Minneapolis have been going through a significant round of some individual and small group stakeholder meetings as well. So I guess the importance of this slide is a lot of public engagement, a lot of input was gathered as we move through the design process for this project. Some of the guiding design principles, some of the biggest things we heard from people as we went through this process, first and foremost, the desire to have this be a green corridor. The need to balance the modes of transportation, talked a little bit about this. How can we improve the pedestrian environment, provide for the needs of bicycles? Think about transit. There's a lot of active transit along the corridor. And then also to look at vehicle traffic. A lot of discussions about the fact that today Washington was kind of a barrier between the riverfront and downtown. And how can we eliminate that barrier and maybe make it more of a seam and provide those connections between downtown and the riverfront. And some themes that were gathered as a part of this process is really history, because there's a number of historical properties in the corridor, desire to have urban contemporary, to think about the river and greens, and also arts and entertainment. While it is one corridor, it was very interesting as we worked through this process is there's quite a bit of difference along the corridor in terms of what happens adjacent to the corridor. So really the need to think about a wide variety of options just because the corridor does vary quite a bit as you travel along it. So thinking about that character, this is a graphic that we put together that really broke the corridor into 3 segments. We really felt from Fifth to Hennepin, it tends to be big office buildings, the importance on improving the pedestrian realm, but there's not a lot of storefronts and there's currently no on-street parking there today. As you move further to the east, you actually get into the redevelopment area. There is some storefronts, there's some residential, very different in character within this area. And as you move further towards the east, closer to 35W, becomes more auto-oriented businesses. There's parking lots and businesses that are really built upon that access off of 35W. So something to think about and things we gave a lot of consideration to as we move through the Washington Avenue design process. Talked a little bit about that desire to provide connections between the riverfront and downtown, and talking through this through the public engagement process, people really felt like we needed to look for means to provide those connections, and through that process really 5 nodes were identified as this project moves through final design, the desire to look for ways to reduce the barrier that Washington Avenue is today. So we had one on the far east or west side of the corridor at the Gateway Park, really between Nicollet Mall and Hennepin Avenue. A second one at 3rd Avenue, Portland, Chicago, and then over on the far east side of the corridor on 11. So the desire as we move through final design is how can we do things at those nodes to reduce that impact of Washington Avenue, recognizing that specifically for the corridor that Hennepin County is looking for layout approval on today, it's got 2 of those nodes, the Gateway Park node as well as the node at 3rd. Just to give you some sense of what's out there today, this is a typical section of the existing roadway condition. So currently there's 110 feet to basically try to accomplish everything that needs to be accomplished. That's the existing right-of-way width. What's out there today is really 3 lanes of travel in each direction plus a center turn lane. So existing conditions, 7 lanes of traffic, uses up about 88 feet of that existing corridor, which only leaves about 10 to 12 feet for the pedestrian zone in the existing condition. Just to give you a little perspective of what that looks like, this is kind of a cross-sectional perspective of what that 10 feet looks like. 10 feet if you consider a couple pedestrians, street lights, traffic signs, fire hydrants, snow storage this time of the year, maybe a trash receptacle. That 10 feet just does not provide a lot of space today. Again, the corridor is very much oriented towards vehicles and not much of a pedestrian zone. So Jennifer's going to walk through the proposed concept for Hennepin Avenue and then talk specifically about the proposed layout for the area between Hennepin and 5th.
All right, so as you mentioned, Hennepin to 5th Avenue South. The proposed layout provides 2 through lanes as opposed to 3 today in each direction. It removes the continuous center median while still providing for left turn lanes where left turn lanes are allowed. It provides for right turn lanes at key intersections, and also note that we are proposing reducing the 11-foot lanes to 10.8, hence the need for a MnDOT variance that gives us just a little bit of extra space to put on the outside. This is the preferred layout that was preferred in each of the 3 venues that John mentioned in the public engagement process, and it is a cycle track at the sidewalk elevation shown in this slide, which is behind the curb. So up at the sidewalk elevation, there's 2 feet, a 5-foot cycle track, a planting / streetscape amenity zone, and then the sidewalk. So this layout nominally provides for a 7.5-foot sidewalk or a 13.5-foot pedestrian realm, which includes the landscape streetscape zone, providing a buffer between the sidewalk and the cycle track, which was important from what we heard from the sight impaired community, and also from the bicycling community had some concerns too with bikes and peds kind of wandering in and out if there wasn't some kind of buffer between those two. This perspective shows an example intersection at Marquette where crossing distances are reduced today from the 7 lanes of traffic to 5 lanes or 6 lanes of traffic that you're crossing. So in the foreground, crossing 5 lanes, in the background, crossing 6 lanes. And you'll notice that the ped ramps are set behind the cycle track crossing the intersection. The details of the intersection design and the design elements behind the curb will be worked out as we get into final design. So this is a concept at this point. So just a different view of the same intersection. Again, you can see a variety of intersections. On average, the roadway width of Washington in the reconstruction segment is reduced by 26 feet. This allowed for the increase in the non-vehicular space, 7 feet on either side going to the cycle track, and the remainder going to the pedestrian realm. As you look at this slide from right to left, you'll notice the number of traffic lanes that a pedestrian would cross, which would be 6, 4, 6, and 5. So it kind of varies throughout. But all in all, less than the 7 that they cross today. So we're before you seeking preliminary layout approval. Then we will continue to work with stakeholders as we proceed through detailed design, reaching that in the fall, and bidding such that construction can start in 2015 with substantial construction completed in 2015, maybe some restoration or something the year after. That is the preliminary layout approval segment that we're reconstructing. The next segment is the concept plan from 5th Avenue South to 35W that we're also seeking approval on. However, before projects would be reconstructed by the city, they would come back before the council for preliminary layout approval. So through the public engagement process, it became apparent that establishing a concept for the entire corridor, including east of 35W, would be both useful for future projects and, more importantly, allow the design for the reconstruction segment to meet or lend to the overall corridor vision. So this is the existing section. It's 120 feet right away, so note that it has 10 feet wider than our reconstruction segment. And as John mentioned, the nature of the corridor changes as we move east. In this segment, parking is also allowed in the outside lanes. Restricted for the most part, but some blocks actually do not have restrictions. So that third outside lane sometimes with parked cars functions as a 4-lane facility today. This is again as existing, showing a parked vehicle and the slightly wider sidewalks in this area that are nominally 13 feet. So again, the proposed would be cycle tracks at sidewalk elevation behind the curb. It again has 2 through lanes in each direction and left turn lanes where left turns are allowed. The concept segment also proposes 9-foot dedicated parking lanes, so it narrows up that outside lane, and also provides for bump outs to further shorten the crossing distance and kind of prevent people from driving the parking lane as a lane. And it does not have dedicated right turn lanes. This is just the same image kind of showing the 17-foot pedestrian realm of the sidewalk and the landscape streetscape, still carrying with a 5-foot cycle track. With that, we conclude our presentation, but would like to address any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jennifer, for the great presentation. There's been some concern from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee about the crossing distance with 6 lanes of traffic that include the right turn lane. Could you talk about why you made the decision to include 6 lanes instead of 5 in some of those segments?
So the traffic analysis is quite extensive and iterative. We tried to go down to a purely a 4-lane facility or 5-lane, 2 lanes in each direction and a center or a turn lane, left turn lane. And the impacts on the traffic and the backup was essentially not, it was just not acceptable. So eastbound, we only have 1 right turn lane at 4th, and that is to address the over 500 right turns at peak hour. The issue with westbound Hennepin to 5th is there's 2 river crossings, both at Hennepin and at 3rd. And so those movements essentially are taking up that outside lane today for the most part. What we did do is provide for bump outs on the far side of those intersections at 5th, for example. So there's 1 leg of the intersection that would only have the 5 lanes to cross. Does that make sense? So I think it was studied extensively. We had a lot of discussions and really pushed the design and really sought a balance, and this is what we could come up with.
Okay. Councilmember Palmisano.
Yes, thank you. This was an informative presentation. Could you tell me a little bit, sorry, more about the plantings that are shown in there? Are those committed plantings, and will those be mature trees? Is that part of the project, or is that just illustrative?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, sorry. These are conceptual. We do have that space reserved, and right now it's only 3 to 4 feet for plantings, looking at possibilities for soil improvements, et cetera, underneath that would lend or support better growth. We are doing further public involvement with the DID and the property owners with Kimley Horn to determine what those landscape, streetscape elements will be specifically. So not only the plantings, but the amenities, the pavements, and then how that ties into assessments, et cetera. So that'll be worked on through May, and then detailed design of those elements will be incorporated into our plans done later this year.
Okay, good.
Sure.
Second part of my question, sorry, I meant to ask both of them at the same time. I didn't see clearly the transit facilities that would be available for pedestrians going from the sidewalks to a bus or to a, yeah, there was one there. I just was wondering if that was part of the scope of the design work.
So the default is to have the cycle track at the back of the curb such that there can be that buffer between the bicyclists and the pedestrians. Mm-hmm. However, when it gets to a bus stop, we will shift that out so that there's space at the back of the curb for the bus to unload so that people aren't stepping right out into a cycle track. And then if there is a shelter facility, it then would be located on the other side of the cycle track. So we have to work out those details of both how to delineate the cycle track and the sidewalk when they're adjacent to one another, and also how to delineate both for the cyclists and the pedestrians that crossing to get across the cycle track to the bus stop. But we are working with Metro Transit and other stakeholders on those details.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon?
Thank you. I had a question about the traffic increase projections for it, and this is something that also was raised, I think, by the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So I understand that the county is projecting there's going to be an increase of, over the next 20 years. We're actually hoping, at least the City Council is hoping in their climate action plan, that we'll see a decrease. We're going to be working incredibly hard to see a decrease. And I think in recent years there has been a decrease on Washington, hasn't there? And so I'm just wondering, where did these projections come from? And my second question is, do you also look at projected increases or decreases in pedestrian and bicycle traffic as well? And what were the projections for increases and decreases in those?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I'll take a shot at it, and then I may defer to traffic people in the room. The growth projected was a 0.5% growth, which is quite minimal, but what we've used elsewhere in Minneapolis, or especially downtown, it equates to a 13% overall growth. Looking at the potential for growth both on the corridor and around, felt that that was reasonable. Assuming growth on specific, it doesn't look at specific parcels, but those models account for mode share as well. I think it's important to note, as a part of that overall growth, we're still looking at 49 bus routes, 11% trucks and stuff on the corridor as well. Regarding the pedestrian and bicycle counts, I don't have them from memory, but we did do a sensitivity analysis in the traffic analysis to look at assuming that we're improving these facilities and that will generate more pedestrians and more bicyclists on the corridor. What timing will be needed for them to cross? How does that further impact traffic, et cetera? Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, so it sounds like we're not as good at predicting the increases in pedestrian as bikes as we think we might be in predicting traffic, but we've tried to account for that. I can appreciate that. I wish we would do a better analysis for pedestrians and bicycles, because I think it will help us get there. I also was curious how this design matches up with the county's complete streets policy. Do we have a match there? The city, we don't really have a full policy yet, although we have lots of things we're interested in, so I'm particularly interested in that. And did you look at that, and does this fit the policy?
The approach for the policy is to try to accommodate and look at the accommodations of modes on all of our roads as we go through the design. So I think that was where those multiple layouts came in during the second round of public involvement, and kind of the balance of how that space gets used. So yes, obviously the auto, but then spent a lot of time with Metro Transit trying to figure out those stops and the reductions of stop locations, the different bicycle facilities, and then also the space that was allocated for the pedestrian realm. And I think all those had to play with one another to come to a balance. So that's the intent of the policy. It's not really a check the box approach.
So it's pretty flexible policy, but it definitely forces you to look at the different modes.
Right.
And lastly, was the design resoundingly supported by the county board, or was there some concerns that they had about the design? And if so, which direction were the concerns leaning, do you think?
We took the approach, not the layout itself, to the county board, and they discussed both the reduction in travel lanes and the providing cycle tracks, or their protected bicycle lanes, as those were new as far as a county facility. There was concern about reducing the number of traffic lanes because it's one of the major roads through downtown, connecting interstate freeways, etc., ultimately passed by a 4-3 vote.
So that was just the conceptual plan, though? So the design layout has to go back to the board again?
No, it was, it does not have to go to the board. It was the approach. I mean, they saw the layout, but they weren't approving a layout. The bar was written, the board action request was written such that it was approving the approach of reducing the lanes and providing the cycle tracks.
But the design does not have to go back to the board. That was the last vote they'll take on it?
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yes? Okay.
Councilmember Palmisano? Councilmember Bender?
Ms. Lowry, this project had a unique public outreach process, and I just wondered if you could talk about if the county is kind of revisiting how you deal with reconstruction projects, or if this was a unique case. I mean, I know it's in downtown, so it is a unique context, but there was quite a lot of public engagement, of kind of a visioning approach, and I think that led to a better result. So I just wondered if you could talk about how you imagine the county approaching public outreach for full reconstruction projects in the future.
I can speak for myself. Okay, I won't commit us to commit the whole group, but for all projects. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, it was very unique, and I think looking at the larger corridor was unique and may not even apply to most projects. I think it was a good experience to go through using several different formats to engage more stakeholders, and we may utilize consultants to help with elements of those, or try to do as much in-house as possible. We still will have a widely varying public engagement plan for each project, because the number of residents or businesses or something will vary greatly. I don't know that 2 years of purely layout public engagement is realistic for most projects, but I think there's an expectation for more information and exchanging, and if people actually want to be engaged, I think we're open to that.
Very good. Any further questions, any further comments or discussion? It definitely was a thorough process, certainly a complicated corridor, and much of that has been appreciated. And also, if I heard correctly, there's still a time that you will indulge more comments as you move to final design. For those people who have participated, I would and have an interest, I would encourage them to do so, and to put the final and finishing touches on this incredible project. I will move the the underlying motion, which is item 9, Washington Avenue Reconstruction Project, which is approve a resolution approving the Hennepin County Transportation Department's Layout 3 for Washington Avenue reconstruction from Hennepin Avenue to 5th Avenue South, and the concept plan for Washington Avenue from 5th Avenue South to I-35W, dated January 30th, 2014, and approve a resolution supporting a formal request submitted by the Hennepin County Transportation Department for a variance from the Minnesota State Aid rules for travel lane width for the full length of the Washington Avenue reconstruction project. That is an early motion. Any comments? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank staff for all of your commitment to this project. Ms. Lowry came out on a Saturday morning to walk the street with, at the time I was a volunteer bicycle advocate, so this has been a long road. I do want to address some of the concerns that the Pedestrian Advisory Committee has, and just include a staff direction for Public Works staff to work with Hennepin County staff and the Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory Committee and Pedestrian Advisory Committee on the detailed designs for Washington Avenue to make sure that the bicycle and pedestrian space designs include to address concerns, including but not limited to interactions between the protected bikeway and bus stops. There's some concerns about how those details are get worked out, as well as intersection safety improvements, including striping, signalization, and signage, and then the green space elements.
Very good. Yeah, and I would deem that staff direction consistent with what the presenter said would be how they would approach this moving forward. So I'll just have that be a part of the underlying motion and duly noted by all parties. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, and I think that's a good staff direction and probably helps move me in the direction of supporting the whole project. It's a little bit tough for me because I wish that we were doing more to address pedestrian concerns, but actually I am so enthusiastically supportive and impressed of the protected bikeway making it onto the plan. I think that's very significant. I actually expressed a lot of concerns some time ago about Minneapolis Avenue and the county project there. I think it was a missed opportunity to do better bicycle infrastructure and a protected bikeway there. I'd love the county to revisit that. I know that's already been approved. Nevertheless, I think it's a big mistake. So for me, it's also difficult for me not to support this layout here. I also appreciate the community engagement, the involvement. I think that this is the downtown council and other businesses see this as really critical to helping connect downtown with the river, and we have to do something with Washington Avenue. It creates this enormous barrier, and we're working on getting some relievers and other alternatives for traffic. We're working hard on providing alternative transportation modes so not so many people are driving, and doing what we can as a city. And it's very impressive that the county has taken some time and care and is trying to do something here. I also recognize that part of what we're approving is a concept for the rest of it because we don't have the money to reconstruct that, and we'll be coming back and we can be working on that. We can be revisiting that. I'm particularly interested because it's closer to where I live and the people I represent, what happens down at the other end of Washington, and how do we actually connect Seven Corners and the West Bank and that university using Washington over that 35W divide that right now is just a terrible place to think of walking, and if you walk it and bike it, but a lot of people, it feels like a very long distance and when it really isn't. And I think this gives us an opportunity to make improvements there. Ideally, when these projects come forward, I want to see approval recommended by our advisory groups. I think the Pedestrian Advisory Committee does incredible work. There are some incredible advocates there who study these projects carefully, who really are looking out for what's going to benefit the pedestrians. We all know we want a walkable city. We want those sidewalks alive and active and big enough for things to be happening there and safe crossings along the way. So it's disappointing to me that this is coming forward without the approval of both of our advisory committees, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. But understanding it was a stretch for the county to get this far, I think I'm willing to support this today with those kind of concerns and comments noted.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll just comment that this is a great presentation. I look forward to how we can work together on projects like this moving forward, and also in addition, continue the conversations about how maintenance will proceed on this modal corridor. There's still some issues there that need to be worked out and finalized. That could be also a model moving forward. So with that, with the comments that have been made, the staff direction that's amended the underlying motion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you very much. So our final item is discussion item 10, bus stop shelter franchise agreement and future direction. Director Kaki.
Mr. Chair, John Wertjes, our Director of Traffic and Parking Services, will make this presentation.
Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. John Wertjes, Traffic and Parking Services. Wanted to bring forward this receive and file item here today regarding bus shelters in our franchise. I thought I would start the presentation a little bit and ground us in the history and where we've been and past action that kind of got us here. Just for at high level, we started the bus franchise activities back in 1979. And we had somewhere in the neighborhood of approximately 200 shelters as we began that program. We carried a franchise agreement through 2010 when the current franchise expired. We've been working with CBS and Metro Transit to find options to proceed forward. I presented in the letter today kind of the global city interests about bus shelters, primarily that we had enough of them. They were high quality and well maintained out in the street, as well as they're placed appropriately in the right of way so that they can address the other needs of the right of way, sidewalk, shelter, furniture, other types of things. With that, back in November of 2013, we brought forth action to end our negotiations with CBS and proceed with discussions further with Metro Transit and how we could come together with a project in addressing bus shelters into the future. And so with that today, we'll present that recommendation and where we're at as we've discussed this with the parties along with their attorneys included in that. And so today, the proposed recommendation and direction are basically, first, CBS plans to transfer the shelter ownership over to Metro Transit. Both parties have been having discussions about that, and they're anticipating that'll occur on or about March 1st of this year. Secondly, CBS and the city will announce once that's kind of concluded that we're done with the franchise, and so we can effectively communicate to everyone that CBS is not in the business and Metro Transit is, and so we wanted to be clear with that. Thirdly, CBS, with some discussions with Metro Transit, will continue to advertise as they transition, as Metro Transit transitions from a situation where there are advertisers separately on the shelters from the rest of the Metro Transit system. So Metro Transit advertises on the LRT trains, on the bus sides, as well as the LRT transit stations, and so their intention would be to issue an RFP later this year, which would effectively encompass not only those existing items, but also shelters into the future. And so there will need to be some transition between now and when that new RFP and selection process begins, which is effective January of 2015 is the target date. So that's the basic parameters of how the proposed direction is proceeding. Because of those directions, I've kind of outlined in the letter today kind of some next steps that we can anticipate in that regards. Assuming that all goes forward, the city doesn't have a lot of next steps. After the actions are wrapped up between Metro Transit and CBS, we need to kind of clean up some of our paperwork and delete some ordinance language, which is the franchise agreement. And we'll come back to this committee to accomplish that at the appropriate time. Likewise, I've outlined in the letter some of those next steps that are kind of short-term as long-term that really involve the Metro Transit shelters. You'll see on there that I've kind of defined short-term as approximately 18 months, where they're going to confirm the inventory that's out there and accomplish that. I know a lot of that work has been done already relative to the inventory, but checking that and confirming that. As we proceed forward with Metro Transit taking over the shelters, we want to be able to communicate out who and how to get responses for our citizens, and so using 311, using the Metro Transit call-in line are the two appropriate ways to get feedback back to Metro Transit related to shelters. And there's an attachment in there. I won't be going through the details of the attachment. It kind of outlines the service levels and the standards that Metro Transit are using as they maintain their shelters, which are much different and better than CBS was using in that regards. Also, Metro Transit intends to kind of examine that inventory as they're doing that and making strategic repairs, I'll call it, relative to addressing some safety and structural issues that might be occurring out there. There's maybe some glass missing, or there's some etching or graffiti that needs to be addressed, and so be dealing with those types of elements on the existing CBS shelters. And then they will, as I indicated before, continue with CBS to advertise, do the advertising piece of it, which is the panel and the like. And that will continue as they proceed forward with this new RFP and transition from CBS to whoever their new vendor will be. It could be CBS as well, because I'm sure they will bid. So that's kind of a snapshot of the short-term things moving forward on Metro Transit's plate. In addition, they've got some long-term parameters. I won't delve too much in those. If you've got some questions, let me know, but there's issues related to inventory, looking at maintenance and patterns of that and trends related to that. On the letter, you'll also see ridership criteria and thresholds on how they intend to approach adding and removing shelters accordingly to users and needs in that regards. We'll continue to assist Metro Transit in the placement issue. There's a lot of elements out there that either in special service districts or maybe in downtown or other places where we can assist them with proper placement of the shelters. Likewise, Metro Transit is aware that shelter size varies dramatically across the city, and the one-size-fits-all model doesn't quite work, and so they are examining how their shelters can best fit on the limited right-of-way and sidewalks that we do have out there. As I mentioned, advertising continues, but then they're also looking at an implementation model for rolling out replacement, ultimately, of upgrading these, and this is a capital investment into the future as we deal with these CBS shelters along with the other shelters in the city of Minneapolis. So with that, I guess I'll just note that there are some guidelines and standards related to advertisement. It's also an attachment, as well as a couple of simple pictures of the bus shelters that Metro Transit is currently using out there. I call them the white shelters because they're different from the other colors that we have out there. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's my presentation, so I'd be welcome any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. And I'll just to emphasize, because there's been some questions coming in my office in terms of what our motivators are, what our drivers are, and I'll just repeat them here, that primarily this is a very transit user-centric approach to what we want to do with our shelters. And as we've stated in our report, that the three drivers are that there are enough shelters, and of course there's a formula for what defines that, as you've outlined, that they're well operated and maintained, and there's Metro Transit, of course, has written out guidelines for that, which are helpful. And then finally, that they are placed according to Access Minneapolis, which is our guideline for transit. That's our driving policy guideline for all transit, for all modes. And so I think that's a really good approach. Metro Transit is obviously a logical partner in that they're in the business of transit and serving the transit rider, which is very consistent with us, another public entity who has the same interest. Just because it overlaps with conversations we had at the last meeting, I want to highlight, just as an example, an illustrative example of the standards that we will have as baseline that are existing guidelines for shelter maintenance with Metro Transit. And it has to do with ice control. So, and I'll just read from it. Ice control, salt as necessary, snow removal is prioritized based on limited mobility priorities, high frequency locations, ADA sites addressed within 24 hours of snowfall end. These are the kind of things that constituents call and want to know what are the standards, and if there are standards, why aren't they being met? Metro Transit starts with that as a baseline, and I think that gives us great comfort moving forward, and I think a mutual understanding as two public entities. Any further discussion? Councilmember Glidden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Mr. Work just knows, I'm really hot on this topic with the shelters. But anyway, I'm excited to see this moving forward. I guess I kind of had this question about your long-term next steps section within the report, where you are doing some inventory of the shelters and evaluating which shelters meet or which stops, I should say, meet the standards for having a shelter. And do you have any perspective on when that evaluation will start to take place? And of course, I'm interested in what might be opportunities for new shelters. I'll say that's the biggest thing I hear about is people want more shelters, and they want a nicer shelter for accommodating their wait for transit use.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Glidden, I know that the inventory has started on I'll say a couple of elements. One, we need a proper count and a proper placement so we know what's being transferred from CVS to Metro Transit. I think that substantially is done, but at this time of year, it's a little difficult to assess quality relative to some of the shelters in that regards. And so I think as we get a little bit of warmer weather in that regards, Metro Transit will have better opportunity to look, I'll say, at structural elements that may be affecting the shelter. And so is it sturdy, stuff like that. Some of the very easier visual types of elements like graffiti or glass missing or broken, those types of things can still be seen during the wintertime, and Metro Transit, has maintenance programs that continue throughout the year, and we'll be dealing with those. I will check with Metro Transit relative to a timeline on how they plan to inventory to get to, you might say, the full replacement type of mode in that regards. I know that they have greater data relative to passenger boardings and alightings, and so that they can look at that information to help with quantifying some of the criteria as they decide to either add, relocate, or replace or delete a shelter from the system. So I'm gathering that the council member is interested in that type of element, and when that's available, I can bring that back and share that with anyone who's interested, I guess.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Any further questions for the presenter? Seeing none, I will move to receive and file the status update on bus stop shelter franchise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That is received and filed. With that, we've concluded our agenda and are adjourned.